All right, folks. So you've now been introduced to the idea of Mesopotamia and where it was. We're going to talk now about the rise of Sumeria. Okay, and the rise of Sumeria, right here, is the first, again, major civilization that grows out of the Fertile Crescent region. I think it's probably, now this is just me guessing, okay? I think it's probably just partially luck, okay, where you've got people settling here and they've got access to the ocean and they've got access to these two rivers, between the rivers, right? And they've got access to a little bit of peace because there's not a lot of other people yet coming in when the Sumerians settled here. So they had time to develop themselves, collect food from the Persian Gulf and collect food from the sediment that comes out of these rivers and sort of figure out how to farm and then create major city states, right? They were just the first to do it. And not a lot of other nomadic peoples were attacking them at the time. But I think it was just partially luck for the Sumerians how they were able to develop first. It just sometimes happens that way. But who knows? I wasn't there. Okay, so the Sumerians. Uh, Here's what we know about them. Okay, first of all, their main crops: barley, type of grain, dates, and sesame seeds, which they traded for other items from other places. Okay, meaning they were the first to create a major trade network. They had engineers because one of the first things you have to figure out how to do if you're going to not just live along the river but grow farms inland is build canals and dams and drainage systems so you have power over the river, right? You have to develop writing. And the reason why you need to develop writing is because if you want to have a civilization, you got to record stuff. How many people do you have? How many farmers do you have? When do droughts happen every decade? Because those are usually cyclical, major storms. How much grain do you have? Because if you have a major emergency or some kind of plague or something, are you going to be able to feed everybody? So you better be collecting enough grain to do so. How much money do you have? What can you do with it, right? Cuneiform. This is just a form of writing that allowed people to keep records, right? The invention of the wheel is going to help these guys move their products around, do their work, as we all know, and an abundance of food. Again, this is a big theme here. Whenever you have enough food for your society, people can kind of calm down from the whole food thing and start to work on other things, including developing culture. Okay? They're going to have a major trade system that has to do with the bartering system, all right, of trade. And there's going to be already a form right here, a form of hierarchy. There's the priests, and the king is usually one of the priests. Okay, there are priests, and the priests have made it so that they own all the land, so they're a nobility now. And those priests simply rent land to the individuals that live in the city. Who are those individuals? Well, they're just the people. What are the people really doing? Not just renting land as a form of paying taxes, right? It's an early form of taxation for the government, which was run by the priests. Okay, I need to explain a couple of things. I'm going to go back here, which is not part of our normal talk, but I want to go back here and mention religion. Whoops, religion is a huge part of the development of early societies. And some of the religious aspects that the Sumerians develop and other city states will borrow as they grow is the idea of having multiple gods. And the reason why they have multiple gods is because the people of the time had no other way to really explain how things happen. So they would have gods. Every early society seems to develop the idea of multiple gods. And you might say, well, what about the Israelites? Well, when we go back far enough, the Israelites were carrying around multiple god statues and whatnot too. So they've got them. They didn't develop the single god idea right away either. So there's something about early societies, tribal societies, where you've got a god of air and a god of fertility that helps you pray to this god to help the birthing of your women with healthy children, and of course of your animals and of your plant life and all that. How do you stay alive? Fertility, right? God of heavens, So the idea of there being a heaven where gods resided, God of water in the underworld, and of course God of the sun. And there's many more gods, lots of gods. And usually every city in Samaria would pick a single god to be like the head god of their city, right? Their kind of mascot. So that was very common too. And then what happens is you start to see with these early cities that the king is going to be somebody, again, usually a priest. The king is going to be somebody who is able to claim that they are supported by their religion. Now, what's the easiest way to do this? It's real simple. You have the priests, and if you are a priest already, it's even easier. You have the priests say that the gods have ordained that you rule. Sometimes that's saying that, well, I'm part god, kind of like, Hercules is part god, right? In Greek myth. I'm part god, and therefore I have more power than the rest of you and can speak to the gods and get their support for our city, that sort of thing, right? Kingship believed to be created by gods, king's power was divinely ordained. So when we talk about the divine right of governments or kings, that's something we often talk about when we get into the 1700s, 1600s, and Europeans talking about how God gave them the power to rule and that sort of thing. Well, the deal is that's an ancient idea. 11,000 years ago, you had kings popping up in Mesopotamia who were saying, God gave me the right to rule, for I am part God, or part of the gods. Keep in mind that we still do this. It's just that we're a bit more shady with it, complex with it. These guys are all just saying, yes, I am God, and therefore I shall rule. Whereas today, instead of doing that, you have people that simply align themselves with the support of God. How do you do that? Well, look at the elections. All the speeches that you're going to see, not all, I'm sorry, many of the speeches that you're going to see leading up to any given election, even in America, is going to have people praying to a god before they start in, right? It's going to have people saying, we open these proceedings with the grace of God, and give him all our praise and all that stuff, right? When you're doing that, you're basically in front of everybody calling down the idea that you want a blessing of the gods to support what you're doing, and therefore you're kind of aligning yourself with God, and hopefully the people will kind of buy into that and be like, yes, you are of God, right? And you want that, right? That's a divinely ordained idea. It's not new in America, and it certainly is not new when it comes to human history, okay? The idea of having some sort of divine support. Uh, it's just, here's our connections to the modern day, right? Belief that all gods lived on distant mountaintops. The ancient Greeks believed that, right, with Mount Olympus. The Egyptians had some thoughts on that. These guys, the Mesopotamians, surrounded by mountains, very tall mountains, and they believed the gods were up there, and it's hard to get to the mountain. Well, the deal is that eventually humans will get to the top of the mountain, and they're going to notice that there's no gods. So that's about the time, kind of as we get a little bit further into the timeline, where the gods suddenly end up in the heavens or down below the firmament, below the earth, where, well, they've all moved away. Everybody, the gods are now up there, watching us from the heavens. So it's kind of funny how it starts with this, and then the gods just kind of mysteriously go ahead and take off. All right. Each god has control of certain actions and activities. Again, this is very common with polytheistic societies. And the kings and priests derive their power by interpreters. Even the Puritans in Massachusetts would do this stuff, all right? Well, God speaks through me, and therefore listen to me, and I will tell you what God wants, right? That's a form of gaining power, regardless of how much you believe it. It's a form of power. So these are the things that develop with the Sumerians, okay? And then, of course, your ziggurats. Here's an example of a society that's been around for 1,500 years. What kind of government palace can you build in 1,500 years? And this is what the Sumerians built in Ur over about 1,500 years. Started down here, this got bigger and bigger and bigger as they needed more protection, a central keep, but they also have all their government offices in here. So your priests are in here, which are also part of your government. Your accountants are in here, all your people doing their cuneiform writing of records and stuff, right? Your king is in here in his palaces. And of course, your god will be up here somewhere in his temple that will be built on top, right? So that's a ziggurat. the idea of pyramids being the sort of function, of a government is not a new one either. Multiple places around the world, you see cultures doing that, right? And I'm not too worried about this slide. So that finally brings us, into Sumerians, because that's part of their background. I wanted to show you the writing that the Sumerians start to develop as they're trying to keep tabs on everything that they're doing over the course of their history. And it starts really simple. The simple cuneiform is this, where you've got kind of drawings of things, but that takes up space. All right. You then get more complex cuneiform when you can actually turn your pictures, turn your pictures into just symbols. And once you can turn your pictures into symbols, you save space and much faster to write, which is why we do it that way today. Right here, this is one of my favorite forms of cuneiform. Ah, my gosh, this is so cool. So what this is, guys, and again, the Sumerians developed this and others borrowed from it. And in this case, this is a later Babylonian example. But this is a cylinder. It's called a cylinder because, it's somewhat cylindrical in shape. Around the cylinder has been pressed in with a bunch of writing, okay, which goes around the cylinder. Now, what this is, guys, is an original message. And a messenger will carry the cylinder with, and it's not as big as it looks. It's about a foot tall. Okay, it's not that big. This cylinder can be carried by a messenger from the capital city of Ur to all the other little towns and cities that the Sumerians will be ruling over the course of their empire, their history. And what you do is you get to some town and you have the priests of that town lay out a nice wet clay slab. And then what you do is you take the cylinder and just roll it along the clay slab, and it embosses its impressions from the cylinder into the clay slab, and you have now made a flat copy from a round master. This is so cool, guys. I just love the innovation in that idea. Somebody figured that out. That was great. So basically what you got, guys, is you got a form of messaging where a king could have his priests write down a law or whatever, an order to that city, and then the messenger brings this cylinder over and gives copies to all the different towns by rolling that cylinder in, and then that cylinder can be brought back and housed in an archive back in the capital city. It's just cool. I don't know. I think it's cool. All right, and what we know from the Sumerians tend to come from archaeological expeditions and what other remaining records from other societies of the Fertile Crescent have told us, based on trade records and that sort of. But the one thing we do have is that in the 1920s and early 30s, there was a major dig in the city of Ur, in the ruins of Ur. And it was really easy to find Ur because the ziggurat is still there today. And I'll show you some pictures of that. So people knew where it was, just it was in the middle of a desert where no one lived in it. Well, in the 1920s, got some people that go and they start to dig up Ur. And they found not only a royal tomb where all the kings of Ur were buried, which means that they were buried with a lot of their stuff that helps us understand what these guys were doing, but the royal tombs of Ur, there are instances where we see that even this first society of Mesopotamia, way back, thousands of years ago, had started to figure out a cultural concept of the afterlife. They actually have some areas where there are mass graves containing guards and servants who were all killed at the same time and buried with their king who had just passed away, with the idea that these servants and guards would go with the king into the afterlife and awaken with that king somewhere, and they would continue to serve in the afterlife in some kind of, I don't know, Sumerian version of Valhalla or something. I don't know. So I think that's just fascinating that these guys developed an idea of an afterlife. You never know how that comes around and where they got that idea, but there it is, right? It's just neat. Okay, so here's an image of what we have today. If you went to Ur, this is what you would see. All right, is some of the remains of the city of Ur. The ziggurat looks great now because it's been partially rebuilt along the outside of it. the original ziggurat is still there. Here's the excavation. But the original ziggurat in the 1920s looked like this. This is what was left, which is a lot considering it's thousands of years old. But it's been rebuilt so that there's something there, right, to remind people of the heritage of the region, right? And this is the sort of thing recovered from the grave sites. I mean, this is a pretty beautiful piece of work showing that the Sumerians went from being a tribal, nomadic people to a settled people who developed some amazing art skills, right? And over here, images of their gods, at least one of them. This is fun. This is a very interesting relief showing a Sumerian shepherder, who is guiding animals, herd animals, and is playing a musical instrument, which shows us something about their culture. Here's a YouTube video of a guy actually playing one of these instruments, and it's really kind of a haunting, a long, kind of haunting, slow sound. It's fascinating. And he is carrying on his back a bow, as is this guy. So they seem to be armed shepherders or tribespeople moving around animals. I have no idea what they're doing really, but the relief shows you quite a bit about what these people styled themselves as looking like. And I think it's fascinating. There's the city of Samaria right there. Well, guys, what this leads us to is the very beginning of not only civilization in Mesopotamia, but also the very first major story that involves the gods and involves a king who wanted to live forever. Eventually, you're going to have that, right? You've got people becoming kings and ruling over a city-state, a powerful one, eventually ruling over several powerful city-states. And you always get the idea somewhere that wouldn't it be neat to live forever? How do you do that? And that brings us to an amazing story of Gilgamesh.
4,000 years ago, in the cradle of civilization, the mighty King Gilgamesh built the great city of Uruk. Its walls stood higher and stronger than any in Mesopotamia. Its craftsmanship surpassed all others. And at the base of its gates, at the foundation of the city walls, there lies a stone of lapis lazuli. It is here that the story of Gilgamesh is carved. Gilgamesh, 1/3 human and 2/3 god, the strongest superhuman that ever existed. It was he who in his glory built the great walls of Uruk to keep his people safe from outside forces, but not from himself. He oppresses his people, and so they cry out to the sky god Anu. In response, Anu creates the wild man, Enkidu, to plague Gilgamesh's city. The wild man begins to attack the shepherds, killing their livestock and depriving them of food. Complaints are brought before Gilgamesh, and the great king sends Shamhat, a temple harlot, to seduce Enkidu. In his wisdom, Gilgamesh knows that bodily contact between the two will tame the wild man, and he will lose his savagery. Upon their return to Uruk, Shamhat and Enkidu find Gilgamesh attending a wedding. He demands that as king, it is his right to be first to sleep with the bride. Enkidu is outraged and challenges Gilgamesh to a test of strength. Should Gilgamesh be unable to pass Enkidu and enter the temple, then he must give up his right. Late into the day they fight, until finally, as the moon takes to the sky, Gilgamesh gains the upper hand, forcing Enkidu to concede his superiority. The wise king, however, honors Enkidu's wishes, and they return to his palace as friends. A few years pass in Uruk, and Gilgamesh and Enkidu grow lazy. So the king proposes a great adventure to the southern cedar forests, to slay the demon Humbaba and cut down his trees. Enkidu protests at first, but eventually gives in. The journey through the deserts are harsh, but the warriors travel on. Each night, Gilgamesh dreams terrible dreams. In the first, he sees Enkidu lying still in bed. When he awakes, Enkidu tells them that it means they shall be victorious in their coming battle and return home safely. In the second, he sees a giant man whose flesh is made of stone, his huge fist wrapped around Gilgamesh's waist. Again, Enkidu claims it is a good omen, and that Gilgamesh's legacy will be lifted to the heavens. Into the glorious cedar forest they stride, and before their strong axes the trees begin to fall. The ferocious Humbaba, half demon, half ogre, hears the crashing and falls upon the king. Finally, the killing blow is dealt. From the tallest tree in the forest, Gilgamesh and Enkidu cut a mighty gate for the walls of Uruk. They built rafts from the remaining trees and float down the Euphrates River to their city. Upon their return to Uruk, however, Enkidu falls ill. This time it is the wild man who is plagued by frightening dreams. He finds himself in the House of Dust, surrounded by the shadows of his ancestors. The spirit of Humbaba appears and curses Enkidu. Sitting at his bedside, Gilgamesh listens as his friend describes the netherworld. The house where the dead dwell in total darkness, where they drink dirt and eat stone, where they wear feathers like birds, where no light ever invades their everlasting darkness, where the door and the lock of hell is coated with thick dust. When I entered the House of Dust, on every side the crowns of kings were heaped. After 12 long days, Enkidu falls silent. Gilgamesh laments the loss of his friend and determines not to share his fate. He learns of an ancient being, the only man to gain immortality, and once again he sets out from Uruk. His first destination is Mount Mashu, which guards the rising and the setting of the sun. Upon his arrival, Gilgamesh encounters 2 gigantic scorpions. They laugh at him and tell him his quest is futile, but still they allow him to pass. Beyond Mount Mashu is the Land of Night, a dark, jagged tunnel that the sun travels through each night. Gilgamesh travels 11 leagues before the light begins to glimmer behind him. Just as the sun is about to catch up, Gilgamesh emerges from the tunnel into a paradise. From atop a hill overlooking the waters of death, Gilgamesh sees the boat that will carry him to his final destination. But blocking his path are 2 huge stone creatures sleeping on the shore. After a brief fight, the colossi are defeated, their stony bodies scattered across the sand. The king notices an old man bent over a tall walking stick, his figure draped in black. The man introduces himself as Urshanabi, the boatman, and scolds Gilgamesh for killing the giants, who are the only creatures capable of touching the waters of death. 300 trees are demanded of Gilgamesh, and from these trees 1,000 oars, for each one will dissolve upon contact with the water. Gilgamesh sets to work, and by the next morning the oars are complete. Urshanabi pushes the boat out into the waters, and the pair are soon encompassed by mist and shadow. The voyage is long, and the king asks Urshanabi about the Ancient One. He is told of the time before the Great Flood, and of the gods' secret council, where they resolved to destroy the world in a great storm. He is told of the god Ea, who warned the Ancient One, and told him to gather all living things in a boat. He is told of the storm, and how when the black clouds arrived, Even the gods were frightened. As the boatman's story comes to an end, the bottom of the boat hits soft sand. The mist parts to reveal an island, deserted apart from a small cottage. At the door waits the Ancient One. In exchange for eternal life, the Ancient One challenges Gilgamesh to stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights. But as soon as he finishes speaking, Gilgamesh falls to the ground in a deep sleep. The Ancient One goes inside and asks his wife to bake a loaf of bread for each day the king sleeps. Time passes, and when Gilgamesh awakes, he denies sleeping. The Ancient One shows him the loaves of bread laid out before him, each in its own state of decay. Gilgamesh is distraught, his opportunity for immortality lost. He begs the Ancient One for another chance. He tells the king of a plant, hidden at the bottom of the ocean, that will restore Gilgamesh's youth. Back the king travels, across the waters of death, through paradise and the land of night. He ties stones to his feet and marches down into the depths of the ocean. He emerges hours later with the plant and collapses on the shore. While he sleeps, a snake moves down from the dunes and eats the plant. Its skin is shed and its body revitalized. When Gilgamesh awakes, he sees the snake reborn and knows his hope is lost. The road back to Uruk seems long and harsh beneath the feet of the king. When the great walls rise up in the distance, he stops and falls to his knees. He raises his arms and praises the walls of Uruk, his finest achievement. For it is not man's fate to live forever, but for his creations to carry his name into generations to come. 4,000 years ago, in the cradle of civilization, the mighty King Gilgamesh built the great city of Uruk. Its walls stood higher and stronger than any in Mesopotamia. Its craftsmanship surpassed all others, and at the base of its gates, at the foundation of the city walls, there lies a stone of lapis lazuli. It is here that the story of Gilgamesh is carved.